Do you remember the early days of the internet? Man, there was this incredible feeling of optimism, right? This idea that it would be a complete game changer for freedom, a tool that could connect all of us and finally hold power accountable. Well, let's dive into how that incredibly bright promise has taken a much, much darker turn. It really wasn't that long ago that this was the main way people thought about it. I mean, think back to events like the Arab Spring. It seriously felt like we were watching history being made, right there on our Twitter and Facebook feeds. Social media wasn't just for, sharing vacation photos. It was seen as liberation technology, a genuine force that could organize massive protests and maybe even topple dictators. But here is the harsh reality we're facing now. The very same tools that were once used to organize are now being used to paralyze. And we saw this play out in the most brutal way in 2019 in places like Sudan and Iran. In both of those countries, as huge protests started gaining steam, the governments didn't just push back. They pulled the plug. They shut the internet completely off, and in that darkness, in that silence, they responded with absolute force. Let's just zoom in on Sudan for a second. The internet was cut for 36 days. And what's really truly terrifying here is how that information blackout essentially became a cover for atrocities. With the world unable to see what was happening in real time, security forces just unleashed this horrific wave of violence, killing at least 128 protesters in just one infamous massacre. So this brings us to the absolute core question of this whole explainer. How on earth did this happen? How did a technology that promised so much freedom become one of the most powerful and effective weapons in the modern authoritarian's playbook? Well, to answer that, we've got to look inside the toolkit itself. See, authoritarian leaders aren't just reacting anymore. They're proactively using a very specific set of digital strategies to hold on to power. So let's deconstruct this new arsenal, piece by piece. Okay, first, let's get a really clear definition on the table. Based on some great work by the scholar Stephen Feldstein, digital repression is, simply put, the use of tech to surveil, coerce, or manipulate people to stop them, to deter them from challenging the state. So you see, it's not just about simple censorship, it's a whole multifaceted strategy of control. And this strategy, it really rests on 5 key pillars. I want you to think of these as the primary tools in the kit. You've got surveillance, censorship, social manipulation, internet shutdowns, and finally, targeted persecution. We're going to break down every single one. Okay, tool number 1, surveillance. Now, this isn't just one thing. It's got layers. You have passive surveillance. That's the mass monitoring of calls, texts, websites, kind of like a giant net. Then there's targeted surveillance, which is way more sinister. This is where they use incredibly powerful commercial spyware, like the infamous Pegasus, to hack right into the phones of specific journalists, activists, or political rivals. And then there's the new frontier, AI-powered surveillance. We're talking facial recognition cameras, smart policing algorithms, the whole shebang. All right, next up is censorship. And again, this has gotten so much more sophisticated than just blocking a website. The scholar Margaret Roberts really breaks it down into 3 clever strategies. First, you have fear, passing these really vague fake news or cybercrime laws that can be used to jail pretty much anyone who posts something the government doesn't like. Second is friction. This is where they make it just difficult enough to access blocked sites that, honestly, most people just give up. And third, and maybe the most insidious, is flooding. Just drowning out any critical voices with a fire hose of state-sponsored propaganda and noise. The third tool is social manipulation. This is where the state gets its hands dirty and actively tries to shape the entire online conversation. We're talking about intentionally spreading disinformation, using armies of automated bots to make a fringe idea look like it's the popular consensus, and of course, deploying armies of human trolls to harass and intimidate critics until they're just silent. And it can get deeply personal, with nasty tactics like doxing, where an opponent's private info is leaked online to put them in real danger. Tool number 4 is the one we started with, the internet shutdown. This is the digital equivalent of the nuclear option. It's the kill switch. It's a blunt, brutal instrument used to plunge an entire region, or sometimes a whole country, into a total information vacuum. And they almost always use it right when public conversation is most critical, like during a protest or an election. And the final tool? This is where the digital world and the physical world collide in the most terrifying way. Targeted persecution. This is the whole point, right? Where your online activity leads to real-world harm. Someone posts a critical comment on social media, and the next thing you know, the authorities are literally at their door to arrest them, detain them, or even physically hurt them.
all for something they wrote online.
So, okay, that's the what. We've seen the tools. Now for the really important question, the why. Why have these digital tools become so absolutely central to the modern authoritarian's survival strategy? Well, to understand this, you gotta look at two different types of coercion. See, in the world we live in now, the biggest threat to most autocrats isn't some military coup, it's a popular protest, it's people in the streets. Now, the old way of dealing with that, high-intensity coercion, tanks, mass arrest, it's super visible, and it risks a huge public backlash. So a lot of them have shifted to what's called low-intensity coercion, less visible, more systematic stuff like surveillance, online harassment, and short-term detentions that just kind of chip away at dissent without one big explosive televised event. And this right here is exactly why these digital tools are so perfect for them. Digital repression is low-intensity coercion. It lets a regime monitor and disrupt the opposition with a much lower risk of creating that one iconic image of a violent crackdown that could get everyone fired up and draw condemnation from around the world. It is a quieter and, frankly, a much more insidious form of control. But, and this is a huge but, this control comes at a steep price. And this leads to a fundamental problem, a real dilemma that every single modern authoritarian regime has to wrestle with. It's a pretty logical question, right? I mean, if the internet is such a massive threat, why not just get rid of it? Why not just build a permanent digital wall and keep all your citizens offline for good? Well, the answer lies in what experts call the dictator's digital dilemma, and it forces a really painful trade-off. On one hand, you have the desire for absolute political control, but on the other hand, a modern economy needs the internet. It just does. Shutting it down or restricting it too much stifles innovation, it scares off investors, and it can absolutely cripple economic growth. And these economic costs, they are not theoretical. Just look at this number. When Iraq shut down its internet for just 11 days back in 2019 to try and stop protests, the estimated economic loss was a staggering $2.3 billion. So leaders have to balance their thirst for control against the very real risk of basically bankrupting their own country. So what does this all mean for the future? With all these new tools and all these new strategies, is the balance of power tilting permanently for good in favor of the dictator? The answer, it turns out, is a little more complicated. The impact of these tools is not the same everywhere you look. In what's called a high-capacity state, one that already has a really disciplined and effective security force, these digital tools are transformative. They act like a force multiplier, supercharging what that state can already do. But in a low-capacity state, just buying the fancy tech isn't enough. Without trained people and a clear strategy to use it all, the tools are actually far less effective. So the most crucial takeaway here is this. Technology is not some magic wand that creates authoritarianism out of thin air. For the most part, what these digital tools do is they reinforce and enhance systems of repression that are already there. They just make efficient repressors even more efficient. And that leaves us with one last kind of sobering question to think about. That early promise of the internet, the one we started with, the promise of liberation, it was all based on the idea that we, the people, would be the ones in control of the tool. But as we've seen, that idea is being challenged every single day. And the real question for all of us now is whether the internet is slowly becoming a tool that controls us rather than one we control.